Today we're going to be doing a recipe that I have been chasing down for weeks, and it turns out it is broken. We are going to fix it. Thanks for joining us today as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. So today's recipe is called to make lemon cheesecakes. That sounds really good this time of year, doesn't it? So that's why I wanted to make it. Well, it turns out if you just open up your random 18th century cookbook, you're gonna find probably a lemon cheesecake recipe. More likely you'll find 2 or 3 or maybe 4 lemon cheesecakes recipes in, your typical cookbook. I found one that I thought looked wonderful and simple, and I really wanted to try it out. I started to chase that recipe down because you'll find out that in 18th century cookbooks, they just copy from each other. So this particular little recipe, it gets copied in cookbooks for a span of like 100 years. You will find this recipe. So I started to chase it back and back to find the original one. I mean, when I mean copy, I mean word for word, misspellings, punctuation, everything. They just copy it all. They don't have any reservation about that whatsoever. One of the earliest ones for this particular recipe shows up in The Complete Housewife, Eliza Smith. It's a wonderful, simple cheesecake recipe, and if you're thinking this cheesecake is going to be like the cheesecake you're used to, well, that's a problem too. The cheesecakes that we experience today are an invention of the 20th century. Cheesecakes in the 18th century, totally different. Well, maybe not totally different, but definitely different. They probably even have cheese in them. Anyway, this one is so wonderful and simple. It says to make lemon cheesecakes, take a peel of 2 large lemons, boil it very tender, then pound it well in a mortar with 1/4 pound or more of loaf sugar, the yolks of 6 eggs, 1/2 pound of fresh butter, mix a pound and mix all well together, fill your patty pans half full, and then it just stops basically there. It goes on and says orange cheesecakes can be done in the same way, only you must boil the peels in 2 or 3 waters to take out the bitterness. So this sounds really simple. Obviously, it doesn't have cheese in it, like any kind of cheese. We have other recipes in this same cookbook. If we go back or forward a couple of pages, we get to make cheesecakes without curd. So here they're using actual cheese in their cheesecakes. And then if we move on a couple pages, we get to make lemon cheesecakes. And it's kind of similar, but something else happens in here. They end up cooking this mixture. Whereas the recipe that we're looking at has no cooking going whatsoever. You're just pounding these ingredients together, mixing them up, and then expecting that to work. So I thought, why not? I'll try this one out. So a couple days ago, I started working on making these cheesecakes, and well, it kind of works. I mean, but the problem is it just plain, by our modern standards of making food, the presentation is terrible on this. What happens is the butter melts and it doesn't coalesce. It doesn't get into this mixture, and it stays as a liquid on top. And if the cheesecake is warm, the butter just runs out. And if it gets cold, then you have this layer of just butter in there. It's kind of distasteful to at least look at and understand what's going on. The eggs sort of clump up together. It just doesn't look good. But I mean, it tastes all right. But it isn't right. Obviously, it isn't right. The question is did they not know? Did they never try this recipe out? Why did they bother to put this recipe in cookbook after cookbook when it just doesn't work out right? It could be they understood there was more to this recipe than what it looks like. So there were steps in it that they expected you to know to do that they didn't bother to write down. I think some of these other recipes help us understand that a little bit more. Let's take the hints out of this 3rd recipe in the cookbook, and I'll just cut to the chase here. 12 yolks of eggs, 8 whites of eggs, well beaten, then melt 1/2 pound of butter in 4 or 5 spoonfuls of cream. Stir it all together, set it over the fire, stirring it till it becomes pretty thick. So what they're doing is they're creating a kind of custard here, right? And then they're incorporating these other ingredients and then they're gonna bake it. That makes a whole lot more sense. I think that's what they actually intend in this earlier recipe. We're gonna take out the cream, because it doesn't have any cream in that earlier recipe. We're gonna take that butter and those eggs, and we're gonna cook them slowly. We don't wanna fry our eggs. We're gonna cook them very slowly until they thicken up into something like a custard, then mix in the lemon and the sugar. So let's get started with this particular recipe. And the way we get the flavor of the lemons here, I really like. It's very different from what we would do today. Today, we'd probably put some lemon juice in there and then zest the lemon in. They don't do that. They say take the peel of 2 large lemons, boil it very tender. So we're gonna be using the whole peel here to get that lemon flavor. While our lemon peels are boiling, we're gonna work on this butter and egg mixture. Again, the recipe is, they just mix them together. That just will not work. So what we're gonna do is take our egg yolks and whisk them up till they're nice and blended. We're gonna take our butter and place it over the fire in our little saucepan here. Heat it up very gently. We don't want it to get hot, but we want that butter to be melted. We're gonna put our eggs into that and then slowly bring up the heat and mix it and mix it and mix it. Stir it until it thickens up. It might take quite a while as we bring that heat up. We don't want to cook those eggs. That's the deal. We don't want scrambled eggs in butter. We want this wonderful thick mixture like custard. So our butter and eggs are done off the fire. And now I'm working on these lemon peels. I let the water cool off so I could get these out of the water and chop them up into some little bits. And now I want to mash them down into a paste. The nice part about this is, I mean, it's completely different than what we're used to. We won't get this into a full paste, and we will leave some little bit of chunkiness there. It's going to bring in a different consistency than kind of we expect. If we think about, say, candied lemon peel or orange peel, like we've done in a previous episode, we get that really interesting kind of like I don't know, like a gelled candy consistency out of these. And that's what I kind of like about this. Is it's very different than the way we would normally bring that lemon flavor in. We poured in our cooled off mixture of the butter and the egg yolks. And you saw some lumps going in. That was cooled off. You might have thought maybe those were like cooked eggs in there. No, that wasn't that. It was the milk solids that had kind of separated out and had, just clumped up because they were cold. Those mixed right in. So I don't have any problem with that also. I think this is going to turn out so much better. I think. Sometimes, though, you just don't know. I mean, you can fight these recipes all you want, and they just aren't going to turn out the way we expect them to. But I think this is definitely going to be better. Our cheesecake mixture goes into little pies. So they've got a little pie crust here, just standard flour, butter, a little bit of salt, a little bit of water. And then our mixture gets dabbed into the middle of this. They get baked. There's no directions in the recipe, but I would say 20 minutes at 350 degrees. Our little cheesecakes are ready. I've let them cool so I don't burn myself tasting these. This is my original one that I didn't like. The recipe that really didn't work. The butter just separates, doesn't look right, and they're really kind of sloppy when that butter is warm. These new ones, really much better. The consistency looks good. The question is, what did they end up tasting like? And so let's find out. Great consistency. And really what I think when they are talking about cheesecake here in the 18th century, they're mostly actually talking about consistency. Not so much does it have cheese in it, but does it have a cheese-like consistency to it? It seems like, because there's all different kinds of recipes for cheesecake, and really the consistency seems to be the one thing that connects them all up together. It's got wonderful, lemony flavor to it. The consistency is nice and consistent throughout, and it doesn't have those strange layers of, melted or solidified butter that's all separated out. So very, very good flavor. I'm really happy with the way this fix turned out, so to speak. This brings me to this. I found this just the other day. Thought this was very, very interesting. So this recipe is 1730, and we had to tweak it a little bit. This is 1714, I think, a very, very early 18th century cookbook. The recipe is titled "The Best Orange Pudding That Ever Was Tasted." I love that title. This is the best one ever. Don't even bother to make any other ones. That's the way it should be. It's almost exactly the same recipe, bar a few differences. Number one, they're using orange and they're just zesting it, which is what we would do. And they use almost the same amount of butter and sugar, but instead of 6 yolks, 16 yolks. That's what I think is part of the fix here. And they work that together. There's not so much butter there. So either we really have to attack that butter and mix it with those yolks and cook it so that they don't separate, or we add so many yolks in there that the emulsification of those yolks really works on that butter and hooks them together so that they don't separate. Again, this texture is so good. I really like the way this one worked out, and it's the right kind of denseness. You might be thinking about a cheesecake today, and they can either be kind of light and fluffy, or even a dense cheesecake can kind of have like too much to it. I'm not sure how to explain that. Some people really don't care for cheesecakes because of the texture on this. I really like the texture on this compared to even a modern cheesecake. So I would suggest this as something to try. I don't know, maybe in a modern world whether we would call this a cheesecake, but they certainly do in the 18th century. So I'm really intrigued by this orange pudding recipe in here. The best that was ever tasted? Well, we got to find out about that. I'm going to suggest to Ryan over on Townsends Plus to try out this recipe. And if you don't know about Townsends Plus, it's our streaming platform where it has the content we do on YouTube and more that's very different. Different kind of hosts and different kinds of shows that don't show up on YouTube. You'll want to check that out. So make sure to check out the link down in the description section. Thanks for joining us on this episode. And if you want more, maybe another cheesecake recipe, check this one out.